Pucks with Haggs
is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 167th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. It's going to be a Pucks with Haggs mailbag edition of the podcast. We're going to answer some of your fan questions here as the Four Nations tournament has concluded and the NHL season is going to get going again for that final sprint over the last couple of months. I am your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. You get all of my Bruins and NHL writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns 3 times a week. That's thrice weekly for the Boston Sports Journal. So check out bostonsportsjournal.com and get a membership there as well to read all of my Bruins stuff. I want to thank our sponsor as well, Prize Picks, our good friends at Prize Picks. Always check them out for your daily fantasy sports needs. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's get into it. Let's set the table first, I guess. Four Nations was fantastic. Awesome tournament, great ending, especially for the Canadians, obviously. Connor McDavid, the best player in the world, gets his overtime goal in international competition, kind of puts an exclamation point on his first real foray as an adult in the international hockey waters. Didn't have a great tournament, I would say, had a good tournament, but like he was dominant. Like you could see watching the game, McDavid and McKinnon just have a different gear they can get to, and they can really just accelerate up to like this otherworldly gear that other guys can't hang with and can't stop. And, you know, they look like kind of men among boys sometimes with the way that they're skating and moving, and it's super fun to watch. But I mean, there's two parts of it, right? And I was on Twitter and social media pretty hard on Austin Matthews because he moved away from slot coverage over to Mitch Marner and kind of opened up that seam for McDavid to just be wide open in the slot and bury the overtime winner. So it was partially Austin Matthews' fault. It was partially Adam Fox's fault, who really struggled, I thought, in this tournament. Noah Hannafin, too, I thought, had a tough tournament. But a few different things happen, and it leaves McDavid wide open. And that comes after Team USA had a bunch of chances in overtime, and Jordan Binnington stepped up and made some really good saves. And now we've seen this a couple of times in Boston at the Garden in big games. Jordan Binnington, who is not a great goalie all the time and doesn't really wow you with what he can do technique-wise or athleticism-wise or any of these things. Like, he's good, no doubt about it, but he doesn't stand out. But the thing that does stand out is in these clutch moments, he steps up and he has this like super high level of confidence in himself and this supreme ability to elevate his game in big moments. And he did it again. And now he's basically cemented his reputation as a big game goalie. You know, he might be a guy that's just okay some of the time and, you know, isn't going to ever like pop your eyes out with his stats goaltending wise, and probably isn't going to be a Vezina Trophy guy ever. But he's the guy you want in a big game. If you need to win one game or if you have a tournament or you're in a playoff series, that's a guy that you want. And I think Team Canada realizes that. And it's interesting that it turned out that way when everybody before the tournament started was wondering if Binnington was the weak link in Team Canada. And I certainly asked that question as well, and whether goaltending was going to ultimately take them down. And it ultimately helped them win. It was part of the reason that they won. Jordan Binnington, no question about it. And if I'm the Bruins, I don't ever want to play that guy in a winner-take-all game at TD Garden again, go the way that he's played in Boston a couple of times. So congratulations to Team Canada. It was an awesome tournament, really fun to watch. The best players stepped up in that last game. McDavid and McKinnon both scored goals. Binnington was phenomenal. A lot of really good performers for Team Canada in that game, which was just awesome hockey at both ends for the most part. You know, it was a couple of goals from each side. It was fitting that it went to overtime. And it was just really a big mistake finally that was the difference in the game. But so many times you see it, and I've heard other people talk about it. in overtime, you always see one team gets the lion's share of the chances, tilts the ice and has a ton of shots on net and opportunities, and they can't cash in. And then the other team gets one chance and they win down at the other end. And you see it play out so much in hockey that way, that's how overtime goes. And you kind of got that nagging feeling, that sneaking suspicion when Binnington started standing on his head, that it was going to be one of those kind of issues and more how it was going to play out. And that's exactly what happened. Really cool post-game ceremony where they had like a mini sort of like Four Nations trophy, Stanley Cup type thing. Each of the players was individually honored and got medals. It took a while to get out through all that post-game, and it was pretty late already after the game was over, but it was cool to see that. And I like the way they did it. And I really like kudos from my vantage point to the NHL and the NHLPA, who worked together hard on this to make it successful and made it so. Like the players bought in, the league bought in, everybody bought in, and it became a tremendously successful tournament that everybody was talking about. Drew in casual fans, had a lot of people, commenting on it. Certainly that the first USA-Canada game with the 3 fights in 9 seconds got everybody buzzing and talking. And it, proves a time-honored point that if you the NHL still, like, it's a great product, it's a great game, it's skill and speed and all that stuff is great. If you want everybody to stop what they're doing in a bar and watch a sporting event, the only one that can do that consistently is hockey when it's a fight. Everybody stops what they're doing and all of a sudden is watching what's going on the TV and is transfixed, is mesmerized by what's happening and can't take their eyes off of it. And that's why I truly hope that, like, the fighting part of the NHL never fully goes away, even if it's what it is now and it's kind of lessened and watered down, and the junior ranks are like kind of outlawing it or trying to like keep it from happening by legislating it out, but with suspensions and penalties and all this other stuff. Like, it's obviously happening less and less frequently now than it did, in its heyday, and certainly the days when the enforcer was prevalent. But I do think that I think there's been a little bit of a or not a renaissance, but a little bit of a return to a little more hockey fighting this year. Certainly Rempe with the Rangers has made it more of a front burner sort of topic. And there's some players that are still around that are going to drop the gloves. There's no doubt about it. So I think it's at a good place as far as how much is in. Guys that don't want to fight don't have to fight. But there's still the time-honored, like, star players dropping the gloves and you wanting to throw haymakers at each other every once in a while. And I don't think you can, like, run away from that. Nor should you run away from that if you're the NHL fully. Like, you need to do it in a safe way. You need to do it in a way that makes sense. But you also need to, like, stop the linesman from, like, keeping everybody from fighting each other. When two guys want to drop the gloves and want to throw some punches at each other because they're pissed, or they're trying to fire up their team or whatever, change the momentum of a game, let them go. As long as it's not, like kind of what it was, the Team USA Canada stuff was a little orchestrated. That was a little like of what they're trying to get out, was the players all talking about it before the game. I don't know necessarily if Canada, the Canadian side orchestrated it, or if it was just USA talking about what they were going to do at the start of that game. But certainly Canada had some willing combatants. So that kind of stuff, like the theatrical, like, fighting thing, it doesn't always need to be there. I thought that was the right time and place for it, and it was a good sort of setting way to set the tone for the Shoresy style, setting the tone for Team USA in that tournament. And I think you continue to need that being part of the game. That's my overall point, is that I don't want to see it totally leave the game. And I think that USA-Canada game with the fights and how everybody was talking about it afterwards, that is something the league continues to need to embrace and not run away from, because it differentiates the NHL and hockey from every other sport. And it, in some ways, makes a lot of athletes in other leagues jealous. I think that the NHL is able to settle things sometimes that way with a good old-fashioned Donnybrook. Whereas the other leagues, guys get thrown out and there's zero tolerance with that stuff. I think the Wild West way of the NHL sort of dealing with things sometimes is still something that other athletes would like to be able to do. And I'm always interested to see if any other leagues are going to start allowing a little more of this. I don't know if it would be baseball, maybe football. That would be interesting. Certainly not basketball. Those guys look like they're swinging purses when they're out there fighting each other. But it could be interesting. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes. All right, let's get into the questions here in the Hagbag mailbag. After we also set the table for the Bruins, just a quick update on the Bruins. No Charlie McAvoy and no Hampus Lindholm. I thought that was a little surprising that he was not ready to go coming out of the Four Nations break. I thought he was going to be healthy and ready to play. Apparently not so, because he has not been cleared to play. So they will be without their two best defensemen coming out of the break, which is tough, especially with the position that they're in, scratching and clawing for the playoffs. That is not a good place to be if you're the Boston Bruins. I think that's going to, breed some desperation here from the team, but because their backs are against the wall. Like if they can't, I thought they were going to have to go on a 7 or 8 game heater in this last 25 games to really have a chance to seize hold of a wild card playoff spot, beat off all the other competition, and end up qualifying for the postseason. The beat out all the other competition and qualify for the postseason. I thought they were going to have to go on some kind of like long winning streak, and they are just. I don't see it without McAvoy and without Lindholm. I see them more as win a few, lose a few, kind of where they've been all season, and end up being sellers at the trade deadline to some degree, because they're going to struggle without their two top defensemen. I don't see any other way out of it for them at this point. And I think the die is kind of been cast with what's going to happen. Certainly they'll still, they're in a spot where they're going to compete for the wild card regardless. Even if they sell off players, they're still going to have their core players. They're still going to have their star players aside from the defensemen that they're missing. So I still think they're going to try. They're a prideful group that's going to try to get in the postseason, but I think they're going to do it while retooling with some players. Now, who's going to move? I still think it's the same names. I think it's Trent Frederick. I think Justin Brazeau is one that's been mentioned a little bit more recently. And I think it's about players that aren't going to be long-term fits for this team because they're too expensive, because they just cost too much. And I think those two players are going to be unrestricted free agents after the season's over, and I think they're going to have a hard time affording to keep both of them. Now, maybe they're able to keep Brazeau because they sort of gave him his NHL shot. Maybe there's some loyalty there. He certainly will have some value as a net front guy in the power play, as a big body that plays that classic big man's game around the net, has some good hands and can finish, is not the fastest guy in the world, but and is not, doesn't have the sort of meanness that you would hope to have from a guy that big and that strong. Doesn't really have that edge to his game either. So you factor all that stuff in. I think he may end up making more money in free agency than the Bruins would be able to give him or would want to give him. Because it's kind of a weird situation where he just came out of the minor leagues last year. He's a 26-year-old. And, he's kind of in a service time overall category where you would think he'd be more of an RFA, and he'd probably get a bump to a couple $1 million if he was restricted free agent. But the fact that he's unrestricted and he's going to have a decent amount of goals and a decent skill set, he might be able to get an offer from somebody that the Bruins don't want to touch, and it's going to be more than they would like to shell out for a player like that. Trent Frederick, I think, and not to mention, I think they could get some kind of value for Brazeau too at the deadline. Trent Frederick is a guy that I just think I don't think he's going to come back. I think he probably, has his eyes elsewhere, maybe, some kind of landing spot where they're going to give him longer term than the Bruins were willing to give him at points over the last, handful of years when he was with them. And he's going to get the security that he was not able to get ever with the Boston Bruins. And I also think he's going to get more money than they want to spend. I think some teams are going to look at him and see him as the power forward that's going to score them 20 goals, get 100 penalty minutes, fight the other team's toughest players, intimidate other teams' players, really be a factor in the playoffs, heavy hits, so sort of play that heavyweight role. He can do that sometimes. He does do that sometimes. I just don't think he's consistently that guy enough to where he's going to justify whatever he's going to get paid in free agency. And I think the Bruins have made that determination. I really feel like Trent Frederic is in the same category as Jake DeBrusk, as Torrey Krug, as players that in recent years have just walked in free agency because the Bruins were not going to pay them what they were going to get on the market. And you kind of knew ahead of time. You had that feeling when you talked to them, you talked about negotiations, the fact that they were nowhere close and never came to an agreement. You kind of looked at all that and said, okay, I think I read the tea leaves here and I see that he's not coming back. They didn't get anything for Krug and DeBrusk. Well, I think pretty well knowing that neither one of those players was going to return to Boston. I think you need to stop doing that if you're Don Sweeney and Cam Neely and the Boston Bruins. I think you can't afford to let players walk for nothing if they're not part of your long-term picture, especially if you know they're going to walk and you have an idea that they're going to sign somewhere else. You need to start getting draft picks or prospects, some kind of future assets for those particular players, especially with a guy like Frederic that you used a first-round pick to get as a player way back when. You need to try to replace and replenish that first-round pick you used on him if you can. Now, do I think they're going to get a first-round pick for a rental of Trent Frederic in a down year? No, I do not. But even if you have to get a second or a third-round pick and get some level of pennies on the dollar for a player like that, you still want to get a return on your investment. Now, Jake DeBrusk, same thing. He was a first-round pick, and they didn't get anything for him either. You would have really liked to get something, and you probably could have gotten a first-round pick for him at the trade deadline, potentially. That's somebody or if, like earlier in the year, whenever they would have wanted to try to trade him, that would have been somebody that I think you could have. It would have been tough, though, because that team was in the thick of a playoff hunt and looked like a contender and a different place than this team is this year. So it's a little bit of a different situation. Same thing with Torrey Krug. But like in that particular case, he was a undrafted college free agent. So all it really costed you was development time that you used to develop him over a couple of years. But you didn't, use any draft picks on him. So there wasn't anything you were trying to recoup as far as that went. So a little less of a big deal on that one, but still an asset that you could have gotten something for and you didn't. And I think they need to change their thinking on that with players, especially with where the team is and they're kind of borderline wild card and certainly not, I think, a Stanley Cup contender. I would think the Bruins management has made that determination at this point. It understands that they're not going to be a Stanley Cup contender. So you look at guys like that. There's a couple of tiers here. There's that tier of Trent Frederic and Justin Brazeau, where I think there's a good chance both of those guys, either one or both of those guys, could get traded for future assets. And I think it would be smart for them to do that. And I also think they have a bunch of forwards, so they're kind of replaceable a bit. I don't know if I'd trade both because you're trading a lot of beef there. If you do end up making the playoffs, you're going to want that size and strength around the net. So maybe one of the two. There's a second tier of if you really get a good offer for players listening, like guys like Brandon Carlo, guys like Charlie Coyle, the kind of players that you could get maybe pretty good value for because they're good, serviceable NHL veterans. They are having down years, but they're pretty good players. They have term on their contract, and they're going to have value around the league. And if somebody is willing to give you something that you want, whether it's a first-round pick, whether it's a top prospect and a first-round pick, whether it's a player that's at a different position than them that would actually help you a little bit and could, address some of the weaknesses or some of the weak links on this team, then maybe I think you have to think about that as well, or at least entertain and listen. I don't think they should move either one of those players. I think they're good leaders. I think they're good veterans. I think they're the kind of players you continue to want to build around. Good team guys. I think you want to stick with those kind of players. And then there's also the highest tier, the third tier. I'd put Brad Marchand in there. I'd put Charlie McAvoy in there, who's obviously not going anywhere because he's injured. David Pastrnak, all those guys. Jeremy Swayman, like they're not going anywhere. I still continue to not think Brad Marchand is going anywhere. I don't care what kind of like one-on-one meetings he had with Don Sweeney. I don't care what kind of rumors come out of Toronto. I don't care what kind of like whispers are going to get cooked up about him wanting to go to Colorado and be with Nathan McKinnon or wanting to go to Pittsburgh and be with his boy Sid the Kid. I don't care. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think he wants to go anywhere. I just don't think it's going to happen. And I don't think it should happen. I think he's the leader for this team. He's the captain that's going to take them out on the other side. I think he wants to stay in Boston. He wants to be a lifelong Bruin. And I think you give that to him based on his stature with the team and who he is as a leader, as a player, as a Stanley Cup champion, all that stuff. I just think the Bruins are going to treat him with so much more respect than some of the fan base does, frankly, that talks about wanting to trade him. And talked about that with Bergeron sometimes too. Some people had mentioned that get value for Bergeron and trade him now. Like, no, that guy's one of the legends of the Bruins franchise. You don't do that. I think Brad Marchand's in the same boat. You don't trade guys like that and have them like Bobby Orr being in a Blackhawks uniform at the end of his career. No, that would look so wrong. Like it's such a bad PR hit for what? So you can get a second round pick that you may end up missing on anyway, based on some of the draft history that the Bruins has had. I wouldn't do that. I just don't think that's a good idea. But more on that in a minute. Let's take a break to talk about our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and you watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun and it's super simple. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. You can win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. That is no amount of chump change right there. 1,000 times your money is pretty damn good. You can also use MasterCard. Prize Picks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. So download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's get back into the Hagbag Mailbag edition. This first one is from ST159359666. That is a mouthful right there. He says it's going to be hard to watch the Bruins after the Four Nations tournament. Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. Like, the Four Nations was hockey at its finest, at its fastest, at its most skilled, at its best as far as, taking a hit to make a play, as far as defensive coverage, play in two ways, as far as tight checking, just like playoff style hockey by the best players in the world, playing as hard as they can go, hitting, fighting, grinding, board play, winning board battles, you guys being strong on pucks and strong on their sticks all over the place, like all of that. It was awesome to watch some of those games with my 11-year-old hockey playing son, because you can show him this is how the game is played. Like, this is what you need to do if you want to win and be successful and be a hockey player that everybody respects and thinks is good and is well-rounded and doesn't just like float around looking for goals and, all the glory, but actually like plays the game the way it's supposed to be played. It was awesome for all of those things to watch that tournament. And, whether it was Connor McDavid and the speed, Nathan McKinnon and his speed and tenacity, whether it was Jordan Binnington making good saves, whether it was Brady Tkachuk and his physicality and the way that he influenced all of those games with his size and strength and just his like willingness to battle in front of the net and get dirty goals and do what needed to be done and impose his will. And Matthew Tkachuk too, when he was healthy, when the two of them, and if the two of them were healthy, that was a big blow in that final championship game, is that Matthew Tkachuk was laboring. It was clear he wasn't healthy. He was having a hard time trying to play though. They were clearly missing Charlie McAvoy, who was a huge factor in that first win over Canada. They were clearly missing Quinn Hughes, who was the great power play, would have been a great power play quarterback, but missed the whole thing. Instead, you had some other defensemen that really struggled in the tournament. But On the other side of it, I was a little critical of him because I thought he struggled early in the series, the tournament. But Brock Faber ended up, and Jacob Slavin, those two ended up as the big workhorses for Team USA. And Slavin in particular, I thought Faber was okay. I thought he had some bad turnovers at times. I thought he looked like he was feeling the pressure a little bit at times. But Slavin, I thought, was awesome. And I've thought at times that Slavin was a little overrated. I've thought at times that he struggled, particularly against the Bruins. They've had his number. I have not liked him in the playoff series against the Bruins all that much, and I really think he hasn't lived up to his reputation against them. But I thought he did in this tournament. I thought he was phenomenal. He saved so many goals, played great defense, was holding down Canada's best players. Really tremendous tournament for him, and really upped, I think, his street cred and his reputation from where it was already pretty high as being arguably the best defensive defenseman in hockey right now. I don't even think it's an argument anymore. I think it's no question. But there's a lot of guys like that, that had good tournaments and really made a name for themselves. Jake Gunsel was another one that I thought had an excellent tournament. Not so much at the end in the Team Canada game. Jack Eichel was another one. I thought he was great too. I thought he was phenomenal. Just looked dangerous every time he had the puck or was on the ice. He had some really great shifts and it looked really good when the Kachucks were healthy and he was centering them. So there's so many players to look at and the tournament itself was so fun to watch. Even Finland, I thought, had some pretty competitive games, even though it was very clear when Urho Vakanainen had to check in and be one of their regular defensemen that they were in trouble because of all the injuries on the back end. But they were still competitive. They still gave it the best that they could and didn't get blown out every game like I thought they were going to. So credit to the players for playing as hard as they did and making it a competitive tournament, making it something that people are going to watch again and again and look forward to. A much better option than the NHL All-Star break, the All-Star weekend. There's no question about that. My one takeaway and my one thing that I wonder is, are the NHL owners going to continue to want this? Are they going to want a mid-season tournament just ahead of the final few months of the push to the playoffs, where guys are going to get hurt because they're playing so hard, and it's going to impact your team's ability to get in the playoffs and thereby impact your team's ability to draw a box office and get ticket sales in the playoffs, where everybody knows the NHL owners love the playoff games because it's pure profit for them at the end of the year. And that hurts, obviously, if you start to lose players to injuries for a tournament that you're really not getting anything out of, aside from really good publicity and making the players happy that they get to do an international tournament. Is this something that the league is going to continue to go for? Are they going to want to change it? Are they going to want to make it a September tournament instead of a mid-season tournament? Are they going to want to dial back the superstar players that are involved? Are they going to want to find some way to get them to relax and not play quite as hard as they did? There's a lot of different things here that potentially the NHL could throw governors in there to make it a watered down version of what it is right now. I hope they don't do that. I hope that this continues to be what we saw every couple of years. Maybe do it every fourth year before the Olympics. I know they were talking about doing it every 2 years. Maybe you do that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do that every 4 years before the Olympics. You have this as the undercard for the Olympics, and then you do the All-Star games the next 2 years. And that way, everybody sort of gets what they want. The NHL can continue to have their All-Star game, and they can continue to try to use creative means to make it more interesting or more compelling. I don't think there's a way to do that. I don't think there's any way you could compare what we saw in this world-class international tournament where they were playing hard to guys playing a 3-on-3 shitty hockey tournament where they're going to Vegas and doing all kinds of wacky skills stuff. They try to be creative. They try to make it good for TV and make it somewhat interesting if they can and showcase the players. But there's just no comparison between NHL All-Star Weekend and this Four Nations face-off. So I agree. It could be hard to watch the Bruins down the stretch, especially when they're missing their big workhorse defenseman. So we'll see about that. Vinny Pearl, who do you think will be moved in the coming weeks? Talked about that a little bit earlier, Vinny. I I would put Trent Frederick and Justin Brazeau at the top of the list just based on they're going to be unrestricted free agents. I am not sure the Bruins are going to be willing to pay the freight on the contracts for both of those players, and they could yield assets. You could trade a Morgan Geekie and get really good assets and really good return, but he's a restricted free agent. Like, why not keep him? Keep a guy that's got good chemistry with Pastrnak. He's a big body. He'll go to the front of the net. He can finish. He's physical. Like, keep that player. He plays like a Bruins player should, and like you want your Bruins players to play. So I would make determinations, especially with the salary cap going up way more than we thought it was going to over the next few years. They're going to have more money to spend as far as keeping their own players, as far as getting other players that they want, all that stuff. So maybe that changes the calculations a little bit as to who they're going to keep and who they're going to let go and what they're going to do. But I still look at Brazeau and Frederick as guys potentially that are not going to sign in Boston, that could get to free agency and make more money. And if that happens, maybe you get some assets for them now and start that retooling process. And, maybe that allows you to bring up Merkulov and Lysell and guys like that from Providence and take a look at them. I think at some point they do need to give those guys a little bit of a dry run here in Boston and see what they can do. All right, this is from Harrison Butker's Burner on Twitter. This season is a wash. Fire Sweeney, blow up the roster, and try again next year. No. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that, fire this guy, fire that guy, trade everybody. Like, no, they're not going to do that. Like, why would they do that? They're literally 1 point out of a wild card spot, right now, coming out of the break, and they have played like absolute dog crap this year for the most part. Like, they've had some good stretches, but they have not played like themselves. They have definitely played well below their standard and what they're capable of doing, and they're still only 1 point out of a wild card spot. Like, this is a good team. This has got good bones on the roster. You're not going to blow up the roster and trade all these players and do what? Start from scratch and then end up like you're the Buffalo Sabres for the next 20 years? Is that really what you want? Is that what you think is a great idea? Is that going to sell tickets? Is that going to make people watch? Is that going to what that's going to do is relegate the Bruins to the fourth team in Boston's pro sports, even below a Patriots team that's like just scratching and clawing for relevancy right now, and a Red Sox team that finally is spending some money. Everybody's celebrating because John Henry finally opened up his pocketbook and spent a few bucks on a player, and now they're fighting over who's going to play third base. So that thing is still a mess over with the Red Sox. But you're talking about the Bruins, if they blow it up, even going below the Red Sox right now, and that is not where you want to be if you're running this team right now. Is in this in this lottery for like a decade where you get a culture of losing going and you bring in all these young players and you can't get out of it. That's like being trapped in hell basically in the NHL. So no, we're not doing that. Mark Smith, Brad Marchand to the Maple Leafs rumors. He has a no trade clause, right? That would be difficult to take. That is not going to happen. The Bruins are not going to trade Brad Marchand to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, no way. I don't see them trading him to anybody in their own division. I don't see them trading him to anybody in the Eastern Conference. Like, he would probably want to try to go to Pittsburgh and be with Sidney Crosby if he could get traded anywhere. But the only scenario I see that's realistic from a Bruins perspective, from Marchand's perspective, like all around, is if they traded him to Colorado so he could play with Nathan McKinnon. Like, maybe something like that would happen. Maybe that's a possibility. But like, I just don't, if that, I think that's only a possibility if Marchand says, I want to go, I want to play for a cup somewhere. I can't sit through a retooling. Like, I don't have the patience for this. I'm getting too frustrated. Like, if that starts happening, then maybe you start hearing that. And it would be like, Ray Bourque Redux getting traded to the Colorado Avalanche for a cup run with his buddies. But I don't see that happening. I will reiterate, I do not think Brad Marchand wants to go anywhere. I don't think he's going to get traded anywhere. He's certainly not going to get traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, they could cook that up in Toronto, make it seem like, oh, he and Mitch Marner hit it off while they were in Team Canada for the Four Nations, so now he wants to go play in Toronto. And Toronto would love it because he's actually got some personality. He's not like some of the robots that the Maple Leafs have right now. Like, Austin Matthews is a great player. He is not compelling to listen to, not compelling to interview, not a dynamic personality at all. and the Toronto media will bend over backwards trying to make him interesting or charismatic or like whatever. He's just not. He is not that even a little bit. And a guy like Marchand going to Toronto would be a superstar. They would love him. They would eat it all up. He would, be a quote machine. He'd be on Hockey Night in Canada all the time, like all that stuff. But it's not going to happen. Sorry, Toronto reporters. He's not going there. All right. We got one more here from Roger Perry. Do you think either Chris Kelly or Jay Leach would be a good choice to elevate to head coach next year? Lastly, what about Joel Quenneville or another experienced head coach to fill Boston's top job for next year? I'm curious if you think NHL head coaches make much of an impact on their team's success. Thank you. Love the podcast, Roger Perry. I do not think Chris Kelly is ready to be elevated to head coach. Jay Leach, I don't think it's going to be a first-time head coach for this team. Somebody that doesn't have any previous head coaching experience. I just don't see that happening. Joel Quenneville, that could be a possibility. Like that makes a little more sense to me, given the cast of characters, given the players in place, given you're going to need a strong coach with a strong personality to kind of lead that group because of some pretty strong-willed established veterans. That kind of a guy makes sense. The only way a guy like Jay Leach would make sense is if they really retooled, they traded some veteran players, they brought in a bunch of young guys, and they were kind of starting like from really low. Like that's a sort of blow it up coach for me. If you're going to blow it up, bring in a young college guy, bring in a first year guy, let him grow with the team and let them kind of rise up together. I think if you're going to keep most of the band together and you want this group to compete for a Stanley Cup sooner, much sooner rather than later, like next year, I think you need to bring in a guy like Joel Quenneville if you're not going to keep around Joe Sacco, who I think Joe Sacco has done a tremendous job. I think he's done a really good job. He's a good guy. He's a good hockey man, a good Boston guy that's done really well. I think he's done a good job with this team trying to get them to play like to the strengths that they have that are going to get them successful. And I think he did a great job of pulling them out of the tailspin they were in after the first 20 games of the season. But if they miss the playoffs, I do not think he's going to be named the permanent head coach of this team, nor should he. I think they're going to have to bring somebody else in that they feel like is going to build it up and get them back to where they need to be. So there's a limit to how much impact a head coach has, but let's face it, like there is some impact because like you see it more in the playoffs, I feel like, where like the coaches set the tone personality wise, they set the tone with matchups, they get guys fired up to play. Like, I think that's really where you see most of the coaching make its impact. It's not necessarily during the regular season where a lot of it is managing bodies, managing ice time, like, pulling the strings at the right moments, like all that stuff. But I think in the playoffs is really where you see the chess start, really where you see the motivational stuff start, really where you see a coach fully exert his influence and impact on the series and on his team's performance. And quite frankly, that's an area where I thought Jim Montgomery fell very short the last two postseasons, and is part of the reason he got fired, in addition to the team falling on its face in the first 20 games. But I think it was about playoff track record for Montgomery as well. And that's just the truth. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, you get judged on your body of work and what you do. And I don't think Jim Montgomery was a good playoff hockey coach. I think he got out-coached twice, got his pants coached off twice by Paul Maurice in the two series against the Florida Panthers. And I just think that can't happen. And like, frankly, Sheldon Keefe kind of out-coached him to some points in that first round series against the Leafs too, and almost won it. I think that was, if you're going to have the goal of being a Stanley Cup champion, I don't think he's the coach that's going to get you there. I think he's fine with a young St. Louis Blues team where he can like have a bunch of skill guys and get them to score goals and play a high risk system and like, win some games and play a fun, entertaining brand of hockey. But do I think he's going to guide the St. Louis Blues to a Stanley Cup, even though he's a championship guy, like in his playing track record and his coaching track record in college and juniors and all that? But I don't think he's the guy. I just don't. I thought I saw enough that he's not going to be able to put a team over the top. Maybe he'll learn and change and be different, and at some point down the road he'll be able to do that, but I just did not see that from that head coach, particularly in his playoff forays with the Boston Bruins. So good question, Roger. Thank you as always for the kind words about the podcast. Thank you for listening. We always appreciate you. We appreciate everybody. Thank you very much for listening. We also appreciate Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. As always, we'll see you at the ring.